In the brutal winters of medieval England, death didn't just come from war or disease, it slipped silently through the very fibers of your clothing. Wear the wrong layer, let a draft slide down your collar, let damp wool cling to your skin, and you could wake up with a fever, pneumonia, and never rise again. There was no central heating, no insulated windows, no modern thermal jackets. In the middle of wind, mud, and snow, the only thing standing between a person and death was the ordinary fabric they wrapped around themselves each day. To them, winter wasn't bad weather. It was a months-long survival test. Clothing wasn't fashion, but a crude yet brilliantly engineered system. Every layer, every cut, every material was calculated to trap heat, block wind, and still allow them to plow fields, herd sheep, walk to the market, or stand guard without freezing solid. It was this system of fabric armor that allowed entire villages and families to endure the long, damp, bone-numbing cold. Wool and linen, two materials that seemed simple at first glance, were actually the pillars of medieval survival during those numbingly long winters. If wool was the shield, trapping heat and resisting moisture thanks to its natural lanolin, then linen was the second skin that absorbed sweat and kept the body dry before the cold could sink into the bones. Without modern gear, people depended entirely on this perfect combination to avoid hypothermia on a single wet, freezing day. And strangely enough, they unintentionally invented the same layering principle we use in outdoor clothing today. On the inside, thin, lightweight linen that absorbs moisture instantly. On the outside, thick, warm wool that continues to insulate even when wet. Together, these natural materials created a pocket of warm air that wrapped around the entire body, enough for farmers to keep plowing, shepherds to climb the hills, and soldiers to stand guard for hours in the wind. Not luxurious, not fashionable, but effective enough to decide the difference between life and death. Do you think that without wool and linen, medieval people could have survived those dark, frost-filled centuries? If you have any thoughts, feel free to share them. I'd love to hear your take. The process of making a warm piece of fabric in the Middle Ages sounds simple, until you look closely at what people had to sacrifice to create it. Sheep were shorn the moment the cold winds began to creep in. Entire families, from small children to the elderly, gathered around a loom inside a smoke-darkened house, where the steady whir of the spinning wheel echoed for hours like the heartbeat of survival itself. They didn't weave to look good, they wove to stay alive. The thicker and tighter the cloth, the better the chance it had of trapping the precious warmth needed to survive a damp winter night. But here's the twist. The better the fabric, the more pain the makers endured. The hands of spinners often cracked and bled from constant contact with raw lanolin and coarse wool fibers. Weavers could develop back pain so severe it became hard to breathe after hours of pumping the treadle. And the fulling process, beating and thickening the cloth, sometimes burned people's skin because they had to stomp on fabric soaked in hot liquid, often mixed with human urine to soften the fibers and fix the dye. To medieval people, a warm piece of cloth wasn't just an object, it was the result of sweat, pain, and even risk. Every woven line was a reminder that winter was always waiting just outside the door, ready to take a life the moment someone made a single mistake. If you lived in that era, would you have the patience and endurance to create your own fabric, the very thing that stood between you and the deadly cold? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes it's only when we look back at the past that we realize just how precious survival truly was. A tunic wasn't just clothing, it was the heart of the entire medieval winter survival system. When temperatures could cut through stone walls and burn cold straight into the bone, the tunic became the first layer of armor everyone needed. From farmers in the fields to merchants in the market, and even nobles walking through great halls. What's remarkable is how perfect the tunic was in its simplicity. Just two large panels of fabric stitched together, minimal cutting, minimal waste, yet its effectiveness went far beyond its rough appearance. A short tunic let peasants run, bend, lift, and work for hours in the freezing air. A long tunic for nobles, finer, dyed, sometimes lined, didn't just keep them warm. It displayed status, power, and the privilege of not having to work with your hands. But what truly made the tunic impressive was its versatility. Add a thicker tunic on top, or wrap a belt around the sesame, waist, and it instantly became a kind of manual climate control system. The belt pulled the fabric close to the body to hold in heat, and even created small pockets for carrying items long before actual pockets existed. Strong stitching allowed a tunic to withstand years of labor without tearing apart. And here's something many people don't know. The tunic was comfortable enough to sleep in, and during winter, nobody dared take it off. A good tunic could be the difference between waking up the next morning or never waking up at all. A medieval hood wasn't a cute accessory, it was a survival shield, and at the same time, a chillingly clear marker of social class. In winters where the wind hit like a whip, losing heat through the head could make even a healthy person collapse in just a few hours. That's why the hood became indispensable, wide enough to cover the head, neck, ears, and even part of the face when a snowstorm rolled in. The fascinating detail is the hood's tail, the liripipe. It looks decorative, but the poor used it to wrap around their face for extra warmth or tie it up to carry small items. Nobles, meanwhile, turned it into a fashion statement, sometimes making it so long that it served no purpose other than displaying wealth proof that they didn't have to labor in the brutal weather. Here's a twist many people don't know. The hood also doubled as a hygiene tool in a world with little access to bathing. Dirt, mud, and smoke clung to hair incredibly fast. Wearing a hood all day was one of the only ways to keep the head somewhat clean. Laborers saw the hood as a barrier against wind and grime. The wealthy turned it into a velvet, fur-lined mantle, warm, luxurious, and proudly excessive. You could say that by simply looking at someone's hood, you instantly knew who was battling the freezing fields and who was living comfortably by the fire in the Great Hall. Medieval footwear may look crude at first glance, but it carried a hidden survival logic and a power paradox that would shock modern people. In an English winter, when the frozen ground seemed to pull the warmth right out of your body, shoes weren't just for walking, they were for staying alive. Common folk wore thick leather shoes with stiff, slightly upturned soles, sometimes with wool socks or strips of cloth wrapped around their feet to keep the cold from creeping up into their bones. When rain turned everything to mud, they strapped on wooden pattens, a kind of raised platform that lifted them above the sludge and kept their feet from freezing. Everything was rough, practical, and never meant to impress. But here comes the strangest twist. While the poor fought desperately to preserve every bit of body heat, the nobility wore absurdly long, pointed shoes, poulaines, so exaggerated that they often had to tie the tips to their legs just to avoid tripping. They were so long you couldn't work in them, couldn't run, and could barely walk fast. And that was the point. A shoe that was practically useless became a symbol of privilege, proof that you were rich enough not to walk much, not to work, and not to worry about mud, cold, or survival like everyone else. In the dark, muddy alleys, a simple, sturdy shoe helped a farmer make it through the winter. In a candlelit hall, a ridiculous pointed shoe helped a noble show off his rank. Two worlds, two ways of staying alive, walking on the same frozen ground, yet as different as fire and shadow. A cloak in the Middle Ages wasn't just outerwear, it was the thin line between life and death in a merciless winter. A thick, heavy, full-length wool cloak, yet hidden within it was an entire survival system that our ancestors, almost by accident, perfected over centuries. By day, the cloak was a shield blocking wind, snow, and moisture from seeping into the inner layers. By night, it transformed into a blanket, a mattress, even a portable shelter for shepherds sleeping out on the open fields. With just one extra wrap around the body, the cloak trapped heat like a small personal fire nest. But the real climax lay in the chilling contrast between social classes. Peasants wore coarse, heavy, dark cloaks, nothing elegant, nothing luxurious, just enough to stay alive. Nobles, on the other hand, draped themselves in cloaks lined with fox fur, ermine, or even sable furs so valuable their worth could match an entire cottage. For them, the cloak wasn't just about survival, it was about power, a silent declaration that they belonged to a world untouched by cold. Thanks to the cloak, medieval people could cross mountain passes, go to market, stand guard, or sleep on bare ground no matter how fiercely the weather tried to snuff out their warmth. One garment, yet carrying an entire philosophy. Your home is the one you carry on your back. Gloves in the Middle Ages weren't just for warmth, they were statements of authority, the invisible boundary between those who worked and those who commanded. In skin-cutting cold, the poor often had no gloves at all, relying only on their oversized sleeves to hide frostbitten fingers. But for anyone who could afford them, gloves carried a meaning far greater than their function. Laborers wore thick, rough wool mittens, one compartment for the thumb, one for the rest of the fingers, simple in design but extremely effective for survival. Meanwhile, blacksmiths, glassblowers, and furnace workers used thick, heat-resistant leather gloves, true shields against the flames they faced every day. But the real drama lay in the gloves worn by nobles and knights. Their gloves weren't made for work, they were made to display power. Soft leather, gold embroidery, sometimes even inlaid with gemstones. A noble could simply remove a glove and throw it to the ground to issue a deadly challenge. A knight lifting his glove to his chest signaled honor. A judge wearing white gloves during ceremony asserted his authority to pass judgment. From the hands of laborers to the hands of rulers, gloves became the symbol of an entire social order. If you lived in that era, what would your gloves say about you? Share your thoughts in the comments, I'd love to hear them. Headwear in the Middle Ages wasn't just for warmth, it was a miniature political stage where every layer of fabric, every fold of cloth, every hat carried a message about power, dignity, and the taboos that, if broken, could cost you your honor. For men, a simple wool cap was both a shield against the wind and a symbol of their place in society, a reminder that they belonged to the working class, expected to bow to winter and to those above them. Merchants and nobles, however, used hats to flaunt their status. Wide-brimmed berets, tall felt hats, even exotic wrapped headpieces meant to broadcast wealth, education, and the declaration, "I am not a manual laborer." Every hat was a political statement in its own way, but the real drama unfolded in the world of women. Medieval hair was seen as dangerous, sensual, tempting, even morally provocative. Married women were required to cover it, and exposing their hair in front of strange men could be considered improper or scandalous. A headscarf, a veil, or a long hood wasn't just protection from the cold, it was a shield of honor. As for noble women, they turned headwear into a full-blown show of extravagance. Veils so long they fluttered like wings, henna hats tall as castle towers, and elaborate wrapped layers symbolizing refinement and wealth. The less practical it was, the more it proved you belonged to a class that never had to lift a finger for hard labor. A single hat could reveal who you were, where you stood, and what society allowed you to do. In the bone-piercing cold of medieval England, it's almost unbelievable that their secret to survival was hidden in the simple layers of fabric we often dismiss today as primitive. No down jackets, no thermal wear, no modern science, and yet they endured winters that were long, wet, dark, and cold enough to kill a person in just a few hours. Their secret lay in a clothing system that looked simple but was, in reality, surprisingly sophisticated. The first layer, linen thin, but absolutely essential. It absorbs sweat before moisture could reach the skin, a crucial defense against hypothermia. If this layer failed, every layer on top might as well not exist. The second layer, wool, creating a warm air pocket around the body. Wool insulates even when wet, a feature many modern materials still struggle to match. The final layer, the cloak, a shield against snow, rain, and brutal wind, and a portable shelter for long journeys. These three layers work together like a machine engineered not by blueprints, but by generations of survival. And behind this technique was a philosophy. Every piece of clothing had to be multifunctional, long-lasting, and capable of helping people not just endure the elements, but continue farming, guarding, trading, and living in a world where nature was both beautiful and merciless. Looking back, it's hard not to admire the ingenuity of people who lived centuries before us. They had no cold weather science, only instinct, experience, and sheer persistence. Do you think you could survive with nothing but that ancient three-layer clothing system? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy gripping historical stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next video. See you soon.